Hi, I'm Garm and this is Midgardia's cool crowdfunding show. I'm here today with Walks. How's it going?
Hello. I'm doing good. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear it. This is a slightly unusual entry in cool crowdfunding, as it's neither a crowdfunding project or a tabletop RPG technically, but we'll get to that later. Um, it's instead a book. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Stars Without Brightness?
All right. Yeah. Stars Without Brightness is a fantasy novel that's set in a setting inspired by late porcelain period Philippines. It follows a group of young warriors who have to sort of face the consequences and the sins of their fathers in a war torn archipelago.
Nice. So a lot of our viewers, as this is generally a Anglosphere centric production, may not be terribly familiar with the late porcelain period in the Philippines. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So the late porcelain period is usually part of the pre-colonial sort of era of the Philippines before the Spanish came. Actually, it does include Spanish contact already. It was a term I first heard in Laura Lee Younger's Trading, Raiding, Feasting book, where she uses it to describe 1400s Philippines to 1600s Philippines. And it's called late porcelain period because um, during that period between the 15th century to the 16th century of the Philippines, sort of the main what do you call it? The main like
Commodity
material, yeah,
export.
commodity material culture was porcelain from China and Thailand. Back then it was called Siam. Um, so that's why it was called the late porcelain period because you would have like all these um, chiefly leaders and nobles, and they would have like they would be drinking out of porcelain jarlets. They had porcelain plates they would eat out of. They had spoons and forks that were like chinaware. So yeah, that's why it's called the late porcelain period.
Right, like how aluminum used to be a hugely expensive material for European nobility. Being served
Yeah,
on
yeah.
aluminum plates would be like a fantastic flex.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so what makes Stars Without Brightness so special?
Oh, uh, hmm. What does make it special? Well, I guess other than sort of having like a multi protagonist cast. It has like six protagonists, as evidenced by the cover. Right, it has six characters on it. Um, I guess yeah. The one thing is the setting for sure. It is not a setting that's been explored. I would say as much as I want it to be explored. Um, Although in recent times there has been a resurgence of interest and research on the pre-colonial era of the Philippines, which is great. It used to be sort of gated behind academics, academic papers and stuff, right? And it's only now, recently, well, semi-recently, around 2015, that many of those papers have been released into the internet, into the wild, so everyone can read up on them. There have been some really nice resources from like places like Aswang Project, which is like sort of like a online database that the most important part of the Aswang Project definitely is the sources that they can give you, since that's not something, unfortunately, it's not something that's really talked about or taught in like um, elementary and high school here in the Philippines, like at all. Sort of the paradigm is that history kind of begins when Ferdinand Magellan or Magallanes arrived in the Philippines back in 1521, and that's because we got all like the history, like written history, begun during that time. And that's why I think books like these are kind of important because sometimes we can forget that despite having almost 400, 500 years of colonization, we've had 1500 plus more years of having of just vibing on our own islands, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And the place I'm from is, it's Canada. It's is a
Mm.
colonized country as well. Although I'm obviously on the other side of that compared to you. And like, yeah, the section of teaching that covers like First Nations history is like, a couple days over out of
Yeah.
12 years. Yeah, it's and some of that comes down to, like you said, no written history before that makes that a bit hard. But like,
Hmm.
come on, man, we can do better than that.
Yeah, I think that's why oral history is kind of important. I would like in my days of like researching and stuff, oral history isn't given as much weight as written history, which obviously uh, it's better if we had like a different perspective when it comes to oral history. I think because a lot of cultures in the earth are passed down orally, so not just like not just like Philippine cultures, but even like the Celtic cultures, right? They were passed down orally as well. I think it was the Celtic or the Irish. Um, those are mostly oral, and they only were written down like years after they've been singing their poetry, their epics for like thousands of years beforehand.
Yeah, and
I
like,
mean,
sorry, good.
and I was just gonna add that like the Greeks before like Socrates were also just all oral history as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and like the Old Norse, most of that stuff wasn't written down until after
Mm.
Christianization, when a bunch
Yeah,
of it
yeah.
got burnt and everything. Good times. But like,
Good
yeah,
times.
I mean, it's a hard thing to look at because a lot of it does get very mythologized, and it
Mm,
can be hard to pick out what's true and what's exaggeration. But like, when
mm,
you look at the tribes around modern day Seattle and you look into their legends and you hear the same like rough story of like a giant earthquake and the entire area getting
mm.
covered by sand, like in dozens of tribes, there might be something to that, you know?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that does like, that idea harkens back to like flooding myths. Like it's happened so many times around river civilizations that it's become like mythologized as the Bible and Sumerian myth and stuff like that. So you know, uh like that, like what you said with the Seattle tribes, that definitely probably was something that happened before. And since everyone is talking about it, right,
Yeah.
everyone's mythologized and folk history did. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it was. We have geological proof of that now, and it was only after that that people went back and went, maybe these legends are related to that. Like,
Yeah,
you figure?
yeah, yeah. That's like one of the not mind blowing things, but like the things that really made me kind of like inspired to learn more about our folk history, about our oral history, because our lately I've noticed that Philippine history is almost always from the perspective of the other, like from the colonizers, from the academics, and not from the perspective of the Filipinos themselves. And that's because a lot of the Filipinos, even until now, have their culture orally translated, folk through the folk people. So actually, that's something I've noticed that doesn't hasn't like worn away even after 400 years of colonization. So I think it is really important to you know um, learn about your like traditions and your folk ways through just speaking with your community and stuff like that, because that's where like all the culture is.
Yeah. So, man, that was a bit of a tangent.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that, of course. That's like half the show.
It's perfect. Yeah.
So, is there anything else you'd like to bring up about stars without brightness?
Mm-hmm. Oh, what else should I bring up? Oh, I forgot to add onto the sort of late porcelain period part is that it was also characterized by an intensifying and an increasing in violence, in interstate violence. Like wars were being waged even more now, even more so than the past. Um, and I think like one that's like an interesting setting, at least, to set like um uh, a story in a sort of like a coming of age story, because you'd be mired in like just everyday interpolity warring and raiding. Um, so I think, yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to go into why I wanted to use the late portion period as like a foundation. Another thing I do want to point out is that Stars Without Brightness is a fantasy novel, right? So it's in a fantasy world. It's in a secondary world, without like real world um, stuff in it, but it is still heavily influenced and focused on late porcelain period Philippines. So there are like counterparts, like you would find like there's a sultanate in there, similarly to how there was already a sultanate in the late porcelain period Philippines. Um, the terms there are all terms you would find in late porcelain period Philippines, stuff like Raja, Batara, Lakan. Those are all like terms that are used in late porcelain period Philippines. And finally, there are actually terms there as well from my main base was like the Visayas region of the late porcelain period Philippines, which is because it's Visayas, it uses the Bisaya language, which not a lot of Tagalog speakers or only English speakers would know. And additionally, it does use like really old Bisaya that you would find only in like 1600s dictionaries already. So there are a lot of terms that even like modern speakers wouldn't know, and I think that's cool because you could like learn something, something interesting about your old language. Like you would find out just how much inter interlinguistic trade there was going on in the past, because a lot of like Bisaya terms can also be found in Tagalog, and a lot of Tagalog terms can also be found in Bisaya. Um, if I would probably like conjecture that if Spain didn't come and colonize us and then like put us into like squares of like communities and stuff, there would be even more interlinguistic trade, which would have been really, really cool, especially with the increased violence. That's why with the increased violence, I actually did kind of like, how do you call it in English? Compare. Yeah, I actually did compare it to um, the Warring States period of Japan, the Sengoku Jidai, which is all like warring warlords, right? I think that's if anyone needs like a touchstone, since late Porcelain period isn't as explored in popular culture as it is. If anyone needs like a pop culture touchstone for it, the Sengoku Jidai period is kind of close. Like just think that, but tropical era, tropical period, and then they're just fighting all around. Yeah,
That sounds sick, man.
yeah,
Yeah, like Sengoku Jidai or the Warring States period of China as well. Very much.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Hmm. That's actually also interesting, because last thing I want to point out, there in Luzon. Luzon was part of like the trade with China, obviously, the Tondo and the Maynila area, but they were also part of the trade with Japan before they closed their borders, during the Edo period with Tokugawa. So if you look at the 1600s dictionary, the term katana was actually in the vernacular, in the vocabulary of traders in the Philippines, and it's not rare to find someone wielding, they would have like Philippine armor and then wielding a katana. So it's like, weebs since 1600s.
It can cut through a tank, man.
Yeah, it can cut through the Chinese warships, they would say, or something like that. Yeah.
Oh god. Uh, the mythologization of the katana sure is something, man.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it's
It's an
it,
interesting phenomenon.
it's a pretty decent weapon made with the steel they had, which was not good steel, but like
Yeah,
it's not it's not magical.
yeah. I think it's because it just looks really cool.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
this
with
is
the
the
yeah, with the bend
yeah,
and like the patterns from all the folding and stuff.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It just looks badass, and people latched onto it.
Yeah.
Japan was. I wonder what Japan felt when there was like that, that katana loving craze. Like, I wonder what they thought about that.
I I
It's
had a
interesting.
I had a buddy who went to Japan a few years back, and he bought a katana from like a gift shop somewhere, and he was like, "Oh,
Mm.
this is so cool!" And when he was leaving the country, the security guy just like looked at the box and went, "Katana, huh?" And he's just like, "Yeah," and the guy didn't even check. He's just like, "All right, keep going." And he was so disappointed that it was like such the stereotypical white dude traveler thing to do. He's just
Mm.
like, "Oh,
It's become just a souvenir
yeah."
for them. Yeah, it's to get the tourism industry working. Oh yeah. Some more stuff about late Persian period Philippines, because I don't think it's talked about much. China was actually also really important already. Um, this is before Porcelain period, but even all the way back to 800 AD, which is a period in Philippine history that's not actually like covered as much. There were already uh, states from the Philippines, specifically from Butuan, which is somewhere in like the Mindanao region down there, that were already sending like vassal missions to China, because they wanted to be given sort of like tributary state, um what do you call that,
Status,
prestige.
yeah,
Yeah, status.
prestige or status, yeah,
Yeah,
either one.
yeah, exactly that. There was like a sort of some salt going on, because I think it was the Butuan chief that went to China, but Champa, a Champa ruler, also went there to China, and they gave China tributary status and um, not Butuan. And then Butuan was kind of like, there's like, if Champa gets it, why don't we? And then they went back and said, we want tributary status like right now. And then the emperor eventually gave tributary status to Butuan. So technically speaking, there were already tributary kingdoms in the Philippines way before 900 AD, trading with China specifically, which is like, I think, an important thing to note when it comes to visualizing pre-colonial Philippines, because there is this, um, how do you call it? This like shared visualization of the Philippines, even in the Philippines, that like pre-colonial Filipinos were like these like only loincloth wearing sort of like
Primitive backwater,
barbarians.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the first thing I say to that is like, just because they wear like loincloth doesn't mean they're barbarians, because like, especially in the Philippines, it's hot. You're right. So it's a tropical country, and we sail around a lot. So maybe wearing just loincloth is perfect if ever we need to get to the sea, to the rivers, and especially when it's really hot, humid down here. It's wisdom. It's not barbarianism. um, but actually, like when we frame it from like, a lot of our material culture comes from like exports with the rest of the outside world of the archipelago. You begin to see this picture. There's a lot more like, there's a lot more regal, there's a lot more customs. There's like words that you would only say in polite conversations, and then words that you can only say in casual conversations. um what else? You would find like people wrapped in like silk, in intricate silk that's like a mixture of like Chinese and Filipino aesthetics. um People would be garbed in gold. There, it's not too far from like, that's why when I when I talk about like aesthetics of pre-colonial Philippines, I always tell them to like look at the aesthetics of the Malaccas and the Indonesians, the Java Empire, the Majapahit Empire, so that they would have an idea of what these like medieval classical Filipinos would look like, even if that's not exactly how they looked like. So if you saw like the Majapahit people, they would have like, these large silken robes and then like golden headdresses and stuff like that. It's not too far fetched to think that Filipinos would also have that. Like classical Filipinos would have that. I always say something like, Majapahit. If Majapahit was kind of like Rome in Southeast Asia because it was like one of the biggest empires in Southeast Asia, at least in maritime Southeast Asia. The Philippines would be like the Vikings. Like they would be like the closest thing to Vikings. Because like Vikings, we didn't have like huge architectures and stuff like that, but we did have like natural altars and a society that's focused on like raiding and trading and feasting. Which is Viking. It's kind of like a Viking thing, right? So
Yeah,
yeah.
very much so. Slightly different climatic conditions, but other than
Yeah,
that,
definitely.
yeah.
I would say it's like it's if it's like harsh cold over there, it's like warm wet down here.
They both have their disadvantages for sure.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Uh, that's that is really cool, and I'm learning a ton. So why don't you tell us a little bit about? And you told me the pronunciation earlier. I am going to try my best. Gubat Banwa.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, Starts Without Brightness is a novel that is set in the setting of Kitatak. That's the name of the archipelago. And Kitatak is also the setting for the upcoming role playing game that I have that I'll be releasing in Session Zero later in January 30, called Gubat Banwa. Those terms are both Bisaya, which means like battle or war, and then Banwa is like land or like area or place or city. So put them together, it's like warland. It's literally just warland, fight place.
The
So
battleground.
Gubat,
Yeah.
yeah, battleground. So Gubat Banwa is in shorthand a tactical combat and war drama role playing game that focuses on the warriors of the archipelago known as Manggugubat. And they fight for their datu. They wrestle with their complications with their relationships, and they seek to find out a reason why they fight in a war torn archipelago.
Nice.
That's Gubat Banwa. Yeah.
And does that sound like unique mechanical system or based on another one or
Mm. Yeah, Gubat Banwa kind of began because I really loved Final Fantasy Tactics and Tactics Ogre, both from Square, if I remember correctly. So
yep.
I kind of had like this idea in my head where it's just like a blending of those two like um, aesthetics with pre-colonial Southeast Asia, and that's what sort of brought me to making Gubat Banwa. So when I say like tactical combat, it's actually like inspired by Final Fantasy Tactics, by those old PS1 tactical games. So you would have, a square grid, and then um, movement is like orthogonal only. You can't move diagonal squares unless you have like a class that lets you do that, stuff like that. The From role playing games, the main mechanical inspiration from role playing games is definitely fourth edition Dungeons and Dragons, because that had like tactical combat and nice like balancing all around, and nice class fantasy when you have like your powers on. And so yeah, that's like the huge mechanical part of the combat. So you would have like equipments that work like at wills, abilities that work like encounter powers and daily powers and stuff like that. And you would fight in these like set piece battles in grids. There'd be there's flanking and all that good stuff. The profession system, which is like the class system of Gubat Banwa, is inspired both by Final Fantasy Tactics and by Lancer by Massive Press, wherein you would have their each profession has like only four levels to them, and every time you finish a venture, which is like missions in the game, every time you finish a venture, you would go up in mastery in that profession. Eventually, you would get all the masteries in a profession really quickly, like really early on, because you're meant to like switch to another profession and start getting that masteries as well. So you're sort of like going to mix and match like these professions together to make your own sort of build, sort of character, basically character fantasy, which is something that I sometimes apologetically like. I really loved when I was younger. I loved going into those build threads in like forums, especially if it was fourth edition. And I just like the build crafting in general, even though I never used the builds that I saw. I just like looking at like the numbers and them using the mechanics to they're fitting together mechanics to make out this class fantasy, and it really was very satisfying to see in fourth edition Dungeons and Dragons, since it was so easy to do. It's just like slot in all these powers, these feats. And I was like, oh, that's so nice to just read while you're on the toilet or something. It's great.
The profession system sounds great. I'm really glad to see that.
Yeah. If you noticed, like Gubat Banwa is like a compilation of the things that I liked, but like didn't like admitting too much, because I like combat and I like tactical RPGs, and I like theory crafting builds, and I like mixing and matching classes and stuff like that. That's not something I used to like admit when I was younger. Especially as a younger RPG designer, I kind of wanted to be like, oh, I'm like a cool, slick indie RPG designer. But then again,
I only
no
like
one,
narrative games, and I only make
yeah.
fate hacks. Yeah.
But like, I love narrative games. Like, unironically, I do love narrative games. But then that's the thing. I just also love games like that. Like tactical combat games and stuff like that. That's why fourth edition Dungeons and Dragons, Strike, Lancer. Those are like great games that I love playing around with.
Yeah, like there's absolutely a place for both in this, wide world of ours, and both serve very different purposes.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to bring up while you're here?
I guess on the topic of Gubat Banwa, uh, you will find just a bit more on like the mechanic side. Um, you would find that there is like a split, so that the if you look at the focuses of Gubat Banwa, it does say tactical combat and war drama. And I say war drama because like another important aspect of the game is well, the war drama, the relationships that you have with other warriors and other chiefly leaders, other slayers, and stuff like that. So like a major part of the system is like complications. There's like complications that you have with two other people. They could be player characters or NPCs, and they would complicate your life whenever it's relevant in the story. Um, and of course, the character creation that I have set up, which I've been playtesting for a while now, is doing like a really good job of setting your character in the setting, which is kind of hard to grok at this point because it isn't as popular, right? So it sets you in the setting without reading too much lore, and and it gives you all these complications so that when you like start a game right out of the gate, your character kind of feels like a character that grew up in the islands. So I think that's something that I'm not exactly proud of. Maybe like I'm relieved, because that's something that I've been like stressing over while writing the game, is that how is someone gonna make a character in such a weird setting. I think that kind of juxtaposes the thing I have with something like Karanduan, which is over in the another game that I wrote. Karaduan kind of doesn't need a setting. It kind of needs gods. All it needs is just gods that you can kill eventually. So you can set it in any setting. You can set it in like Osaka streets 1970, Hong Kong 1980s, or Philippines in 1950s and stuff like that, or even just like classic fantasy settings, and it would still kind of work because it would fit like the sort of theme of Karanduan is just fighting against oppressive systems. so you could slot it into any setting that you would want. Um, but for Gubat Banwa, I went like hard the other direction. Where I was like, no, there's a setting to this game, and the mechanics are married to the setting of this game. Unfortunately, so you're gonna have to deal with that. So when it came to character creation, I had to think of ways to ground the characters that the players would be making into the setting itself. Um, and yeah, I think life path style of generation is like the best way to approach that.
It's exactly what I was gonna ask if it was gonna be a life path system.
Yeah. The most interesting part is that there's a D66 table of interesting events that you roll three times on when you create a character. That kind of it tells you a bit about the setting. It tells you about what your character has done wrong, and it tells you if your character is interesting. So there's stuff there like you might have had your hand cut off and replaced with a porcelain arm, or you sort of made one of the Fey folk, Tamawo, in the setting, kind of angry, and they changed something about you physically, and you would define what it is. So it can be like your hair might have turned like yellow or something and stuff like that. So yeah, those are really interesting events that you can use to like ground your character in there. And the more important part when writing them is that they feel more like prompts, so that you can expand upon them whenever you wish, and you're not like limited to the events that you have in the page.
Right.
Yeah.
This is a slight tangent, but I have to ask. Um, I've seen D66 tables in a lot of things, starting with everything Aaron Clooney has ever written. What? Why D66 tables instead of like a D10 or what have you? What's the
Oh.
advantage that that brings from a design perspective, aside from
Uh.
just looking cool, or is it
Um.
just looking cool?
It's definitely. I wanted to write something more than 20 entries, but less than 100. Because like I don't want to do 100 entries. Since I'm the only one writing them all down, and that's a huge like time sink for me. Even if I'm doing it while watching like YouTube videos or something. Um, so that's like the main reason D66. That's why there's so many D66 tables in the game actually, because I wanted a lot of options, but not 100 options. You feel me?
Yeah, yeah. No, I can totally understand that.
Yeah.
I do lots of like lists of 10 things for this group's Patreon, and
Oh,
writing 100 lists that would be terrible. I
right. Yeah.
have trouble getting to 10 some months, man.
Yeah. Exactly. Like I want to give them options, but I'm only one man.
I really enjoy the way you talk, by the way.
Thank you.
Um, you're a joy to talk to. Yeah. Anything else
Thank
you'd
you.
like to bring up about either Stars Without Brightness or Gubat Banwa?
I hope. What would I bring up? I think I want to bring up one last thing about Stars Without Brightness. Before anything else, and I think it's that like its main theme is sort of like an antithesis, not antithesis, but like a it's at its core, it's like a war story, right? It's like a coming of age war story, and it's also like not exactly an ideologue, but it's like it has principles and beliefs that sort of span from across a lot of people that are sort of instilled in the main characters. And I hope that when people read it, even if it's just the first book, and the first book is kind of like world buildy, setting uppy feel, because there's like 5 books in the series. I hope that people will be able to be able to notice the sort of um, themes of the books, because if you do, I think you're going to enjoy the books a lot more. That's for sure. And Yeah, when writing Stars Without Brightness, I had like this new sort of writing paradigm where I had to focus really hard on the characters, because back then when I was writing like past novels, it was like a focus on the world, and I sort of got bored of that, and I wanted like, when people read, they want people to connect to, when especially like fantasy novels where everything else seems so distant and fantastical. You want like a common touching ground touchstone, and I think I used characters that have very human problems, to sort of establish that connection with the reader. So I hope people enjoy that aspect of Stars Without Brightness, and that they look forward to the other four books in the series.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to great success for this book because it sounds like a really interesting project and something I think is definitely up the alley of a lot of people. And having the tie-in RPG is definitely gonna help with that, I think.
Yeah, I'm gonna be selling both of them on my little electronic booth in Session Zero. So I hope there will be some more sales, because I do want to recuperate costs on it eventually. But yeah,
Oh yeah, one more thing. What slash when is session zero?
what is Session Zero and when is Session Zero?
Yeah.
So Session Zero is basically a online convention that will be happening through GatherTown, I think it's called. So GatherTown is kind of like a Pokemon-esque sort of space that you can have an avatar in, and you can walk around. So it's literally like going into a convention, but like in a virtual space. Um, and it's a online convention for game designers all around. Well, it started in the Philippines, but now we have a lot of game designers from India, from Myanmar, from Indonesia, from Malaysia. So it's not just like a Filipino thing anymore, but it does include like Asian people as well in the sort of in the
The
game design
community. Yeah.
space.
All right.
Yeah, the community. So if you're into that, if you want to see what our little part of the RPG design world is doing, implore you to go to Session Zero. Session Zero is still open for registrants, and it's good if you do register, because you can't get in by January 30. I think, even though one of the I'm friends with like the organizers, so one of them did say that they are taking in like walk-ins eventually, if I remember correctly. I don't know how they're gonna do that, but they've done their magic before, so I trust them. So yeah, and Session Zero will happen in January 30 until I think it's 2 days. So January 30 to January 31. Is there 31 in January?
I think so. I believe so.
Yeah, is there? Oh, there is. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's yeah.
I wrote a long post for the Patreon about calendars like last month, so you think I'd know all this, but no.
Yeah. But yeah, all you have to do is go to sessionzerocon.com, and that sends you directly to the Session Zero online page, and you can register immediately from like the first page. So yeah, if you're into that, there's a lot of like exhibitors, not just like there's also panels, and then not just like design, but also there's artists and merchants that are selling dice, art, commissions, etc. So it's a fun time, and yeah, I hope people get to go there.
That's super cool. I miss conventions, man. I miss them so
Yeah.
bad. I had so many plans for 2020.
Right? Oh man. The biggest bummer for 2020, other than of course the pandemic and everything closing down, is the Session Zero 2020, which was supposed to be in this new spanky new sort of venue that was like bigger, and it would have taken 2 days instead of just the one that we had back then, in the first Session Zero. And then we would have like designers from America that would be coming over. It was gonna be so exciting, and so many people were excited for it. Even like non RPG people wanted to go, because like you could. It's basically like a comic cat, uh, since you can sell your art stuff there. But then, unfortunately, it was canceled. It was closed down because of increasing pandemic numbers, especially in the Philippines, where it's not being handled well by the by the administration. So yeah, so I'm sort of bringing all that hype that I had for 2020 session 0 into 2021, and I don't know, I just can't help but be excited for session 0. It's such a nice thing.
Yeah, session zero sounds really cool. I might be there. We'll see.
Yeah. Oh, that'll be so exciting.
And yeah, there will be links to the two places to buy Stars Without Brightness just below this video, as well as a link to Session Zero's website. Um, yeah. Any final words for our lovely audience?
Um, Stay safe. If you do manage to buy Stars Without Brightness, I hope you enjoy it. Um, and always remember to make God bleed.
Good advice all around. All right. Have a good night, everybody.